Chapter 157 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Krishna's Pranks. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Krishna was old enough to begin his pranks. It was his eternal delight to tease the gopis. Yashoda had to listen often to the complaints about her son's mischief in the houses of the gopis. It became almost a daily ritual. This string of complaints about Krishna. One of them told her, "Your son has become mischievous beyond words. One day it was time for me to milk the cow. I went there and what do I find? Your son has untied the calf and it had drunk all the milk, and I found nothing for myself. When I saw him standing by, I scolded him. He just laughed at me." Another gopi said, "Your son has become proficient in the art of stealing. He has 100 ways of stealing curds and butter from my house. He eats up some of it and the rest. He gives to the monkeys which are waiting on the trees. He then breaks the pots. His mischief is too much." A third gopi said, "He comes to my house looking for curds and butter and milk. Sometimes he does not find them. Then he hurts the children by pinching them and runs away after making them cry." Yet another complaint was, "We are bent on our household tasks. We cannot always sit on guard over the butter pot. So we keep it in a dark room, and even that in a dark corner. Your son does not care how dark the room is. The jewels he wears are like lamps, and he finds out where the pot is placed and steals all of it if we are not there. If I keep it beyond his reach," said another gopi, "he tries another trick. He sees the butter pot hanging from the roof. It is placed in a receptacle made up of rope. Krishna first places the tripod I use for churning the butter. On that he places the mortar, and on that he makes one of his friends stand. He gets up on the back of this boy and makes a hole in the pot of milk or curds or butter. If I come there and find him out, I shout, 'Krishna, I have caught you today. You are stealing from my house.' He is undaunted. He makes faces at me and says, 'I am the owner of this house and you are the thief.' I had just cleaned up," said another. "I had cleaned up the place. Krishna came and he asked for butter. I did not give him any butter and he became very angry with me. When I was busy with other things, he brought all sorts of muck from outside, from the street, and he brought dirty water and he poured it inside the house. He strewed the entire house with the dirt he had brought with him." All the while Krishna would stand by his mother's side. One gopi, enraged at the look on his face, said, "Look at him. He looks as though he is the most innocent of all children. Yet, Yashoda, the pranks of your son are really and truly too many for us to bear them. Punish him." Yashoda would turn towards her son with angry eyes, but looking at his tear-filled eyes and his lips trembling as though with fear and his eyebrows drawn together as though in anticipation of pain, she would not have the heart to scold him. The gopis would also go back to their houses, forgetting their anger and thinking all the while of the beautiful face of Krishna, of his innocent eyes, of his sweet smile and his mischievous ways. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamast. Chapter 158 of Shrimadbhagavatam, Yashoda sees a vision. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. One day, the children were all playing in the courtyard in front of the house, and Yashoda was inside, busy with some task pertaining to the household. Suddenly, Balarama rushed to her and said, "Mother, mother, Krishna is eating mud by handfuls." She looked at him as though she did not believe it, but the other boys who had come with Balarama nodded their heads and said, "Yes, mother, we saw him with our eyes, Krishna eating mud." Yashoda rushed up to Krishna and caught hold of him with her left hand, with her right hand raised as though to strike him. She said, "Is there no end to your mischief? Why did you eat mud? I am going to punish you today." Krishna shook his head and said, Of course I did not eat mud. I never eat mud. I hate mud. I hate to eat such stuff, Yashoda said. But these boys saw you eating mud. This Balarama, your brother, saw you and they told me you ate mud. Mother, Krishna said, they are all telling a lie. Try and check if they are speaking the truth. Look into my mouth and see if there is any mud there. Show me your mouth, said Yashoda, and the Lord of Lords, Narayana, who had assumed a human form for the welfare of mankind, Krishna, opened his mouth for his mother to see. She looked, and what she saw there filled her with awe. Inside the sweet mouth of her son, Yashoda saw the entire universe, moving objects and immovable things. She saw the heavens and 8 quarters, the mountains and islands and all the 7 oceans which surrounded this earth. She saw the 7 islands which comprised this earth. She saw the Lord of the winds, and she saw the celestial world, the abode of the Devas, where she discerned the great Agni by name Vadhava, and she saw the moon and the stars, the 5 elements, 5, fire, earth, water, air, and ether, wherein is placed the earth. She saw the gods who presided over the senses and the Indriyas themselves in their glowing forms. She saw the mind, the Mahat Tattva, the Tanmatras, the 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. She could perceive the balance of the 3 gunas which goes by the name Prakriti. She saw it all. When the Paramatma and the Jivatma are one with each other, then there is no disturbance in the equilibrium of the 3 gunas. But when the Jivatma moves away from the other, there is an imbalance in the state of equilibrium which had been holding them so far, and there is a movement in the state of the gunas. This is because Kala becomes one of the factors. When the time has come, the Swabhava of the Jivatma causes the involvement of the Atman in the world, and the manifestation of the world itself is a result of this imbalance. This throb in the state of the static gunas. Yashoda saw all this, and she saw the birth of the universe. And strange sight, she saw the Gokula, and there she saw herself looking inside the mouth of her little son. She looked around her, and there was no one, and she asked herself, can this be a dream? And she told herself again and again, no, it is not a dream. I am wide awake. This is indeed the Maya of Lord Narayana. If it is so, then everyone must have seen this. Is it an illusion-born image, like the image of myself which I see in the mirror? But then, how can my son Krishna also be seen by me in this picture? How can one see the mirror also in the picture caused by reflection in the mirror? Is it then some power possessed by my child? So she speculated with wonderment writ on her face. She then said, I salute that state which is beyond the comprehension of the mind, of action and of words. It is the basis, the essential factor of this universe. This entire world and other worlds shine with life and glory because of this state, which is the cause of action, of movement, of life. This universe unfolds itself because of the movement in the state, and I salute that state. The Lord has caused in me the Maya, which makes me think that I am an entity by name Yashoda, that I have an husband, Nanda, that this is my son, that I am the queen of Gokula, that I am the mistress of all the people in Gokula. My Maya is now apparent to me, and I prostrate before the Lord, who is the cause of all this Maya. When he saw his mother in this condition, Krishna brought to bear on her the great Vishnu Maya, which goes by the name Putra Sneha, meaning love for one's child. Yashoda at once forgot all the words which she had spoken till then. All the realization of the truth of the Brahman left her. She shook herself as if from a trance, and once again she was caught up in the web of Maya. She did not even remember what had happened. It was like a dream which is entirely forgotten. The absolute truth, the Paramatma, who is called Indra to those who perform the yagas by name Rik, Yajus and Sama. The Karmakanda is comprised of these rites, who is called the Brahman by the Upanishads. Vedanta, the ultimate knowledge of the Vedas, is called the Upanishads, who is called by the name Purusha by the Sankhya philosophers, who is called the Paramatma by the yogis. That Paramatma was to Yashoda her son, and a mischievous son who had to be punished off and on for his pranks, who had a long string of thefts to his credit. King Parikshit, who was listening to the story intently, said, "What an amount of punya the Nandas must have accumulated to have the great good fortune of calling him their child. Devaki and Vasudeva did not have the luck. Gods like Brahma do but sing the praises of the Lord. They are not as fortunate as these cowherd people or couple who had him all for themselves. Yashoda, the most fortunate of women whose breasts fed the Lord Narayana. Tell me, my Lord, how did it happen that Narayana chose these two to receive this great honor?" Shuka said, "The Vasu by name Drona and his wife Dhara had been asked by Brahma to be born on the earth during the time when Narayana had promised to be born. They had asked him for a boon. They said, 'We will be born on the earth and will be beset with the qualities of the earth and the taints which are earthly. Please grant us the boon that we should have absolute bhakti towards Narayana, which is the only way to cross the sea of pain, which is another name for life on the earth.' So be it," said Brahma. Drona was born as Nanda and his wife Dhara as Yashoda. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamasthu. Chapter 159 of Shrimadbhagavatam. Yashoda ties up Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It was one of the usual days in Gokula. Yashoda found that her maids were busy with other tasks, and so she thought that she would herself churn the curds for butter. She went to the vessel containing curds and began to churn it. While she was at her task, Krishna came to her. He was hungry and he wanted to be fed. He looked at his mother, who was looking beautiful. Unaccustomed as she was to work which others did for her usually, Yashoda looked tired. Her face was like a lotus touched with raindrops. Her hands had bangles on them which tinkled as she churned. Her hair was all coming loose, and the string of malati flowers she was wearing was trying to fall off. Her earrings tossed to and fro, and her silken dress was whirling along with the movement of her hands and arms. Krishna went near her and playfully caught the churner as if to say, "That is enough. Please look at me and feed me since I am hungry." Yashoda smiled at him, and gathering up her child in her arms, she sat down. Placing him on her lap, she began to feed him. While she was feeding, Yashoda smelt the milk overflowing in the vessel which she had placed on the fire. Placing the child on the ground, she rushed to the kitchen to save the milk. Krishna was very angry with her since she had not satisfied his hunger. With his throbbing lip caught between his teeth, Krishna took up the churner in his hands and hit the vessel filled with the curds. The pot broke and he took a large helping of the butter which had been formed there. He then brought false tears to his eyes and, going out into the courtyard, concealed himself in a corner and went on eating the butter. Yashoda, after attending to the milk, came out with the idea of resuming the task of making butter. She saw the broken pot, the curds which were flowing all over the place. Krishna was not to be seen at all. She smiled to herself at his sweet mischief and began to look for him. He was sitting on the mortar and he was eating butter. The monkeys around him were also being fed. Yashoda approached him from behind. She had a little stick in her hand. Krishna saw her when she had come very near, and seeing the stick in her hand, he tried to run away as though he were terribly afraid of her. frightened of the punishment in store for him. Yashoda was running after him to catch hold of him whom the yogis had not been able to realize, him whom they cannot touch even with their minds. Yashoda was trying to capture him, beat him up and tie him up to stop him from further mischief. Krishna saw his mother tired out by the chasing game. He was bent on playing with her. Her dress was all awry and her face was wet with sweat. With her large breasts and wide hips, she found it difficult to keep pace with the little mite who was teasing her. Her hair had come loose and the ground was striven with the malati flowers she had been wearing in her tresses. Krishna felt sorry for her and allowed himself to be caught by her finally. She held him tight in her left hand and went on scolding him. Krishna was crying and his eyes filled with tears. He rubbed his eyes with his little fists, and all around his eyes the black collyrium had run, making his face more beautiful than before. He looked this way and that, not meeting his mother's eyes. He looked this way and that, not meeting his mother's eyes. Holding him firmly in her hand, she said, "Your mischief has become too much for even me to bear. It is not possible to control you any more. I have to punish you in some drastic manner, since words of persuasion do not seem to have any effect on your naughty mind. You little monkey, you stole the butter and sitting on the mortar, you kept on eating it as though you have done nothing wrong. Just you wait. See if I do not beat you with this stick." Krishna looked scared and he clung to her as though in sheer fright. Yashoda loved her son very much. So much so, she felt like gathering him up in her arms and hugging him. But she thought that she had to act firm, and so she said, "All right, I will not beat you, but I am going to tie you up to this mortar, which was your throne some time back. I will see how you can do any more mischief when you are so securely tied up." Yashoda brought a piece of rope and placing Krishna by the side of the mortar, she tried to tie him up. She tried to tie up that absolute truth, him who had no inside and no outside, who is above the worlds and below the worlds and in the worlds too, who is himself the universe and all the living and non-living beings on it, who, to save mankind, had taken the form of a human being. Him Yashoda tried to tie up with a piece of string. She bound him up and now began to tie the little boy to the mortar. When she tried to knot the rope, she found it was too short. She got another piece and tied it to the one on the waist of Krishna. Again, after trying, she found that she could not tie him up. Again, she got another length and the same problem confronted her. The length was not enough. It was short by 2 inches. She did not think what was happening nor why. She kept on bringing rope after rope, string after string, and all the rope in the house was exhausted, and still she was not able to tie up her little son. A crowd had collected round her by then. The gopis at home were watching her chagrin with amusement. Looking at her and her tired face, Krishna felt sorry for her, and taking pity on her, he allowed himself to be tied up. This entire universe is under his control, and with a piece of rope, Yashoda was able to tie him up. Is it not evident that the Lord can be tied up only with a thread, silken and fragile though it be, which goes by the name Bhakti? Yashoda was fortunate to achieve what Brahma could not, nor Mahadeva, nor even Lakshmi. This innocent gopi could grab him in her arms and tie him up to a mortar. Heaving a sigh of relief, Yashoda went inside the house to resume her duties and saying, "I can have some peace now that you are tied up securely." Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Chapter 160 of Shrimadbhagavatam, The Twin Trees in the Courtyard. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Krishna sat on the mortar for a while and he got bored with sitting quietly. He played with the monkeys for a while and even that game palled after a time. He then began to crawl with the mortar trailing behind him. He was going on all fours and he reached the front courtyard of the house. Some boys were playing at some distance. Otherwise, there was no one around. Krishna saw two big trees growing together like they were twins. They were Arjuna trees. Krishna paused for a while and then he went between them. He crossed the spot where they were joined, but the mortar got stuck. Krishna pulled the mortar along with him while crawling and he went on without looking back. There was a sudden noise. The trees had been uprooted by the mortar, which Krishna had dragged along with him. They fell to the ground with a crash. Out of each of the fallen trees there arose a glowing form. The two fell at his feet and said, "Great is our good fortune. The curse of Narada is now ended since your gracious feet touched us. We are now pure enough to go back to our abode in the earth. We can go back to our father Kubera." They then vanished from the earth. The curiosity of Parikshit was aroused. He said, "My lord, please tell me the story of these two sons of Kubera. Why did Narada curse them?" Shuka said, I will tell you, Kubera, the lord of wealth and the guardian of northern quarter, had two sons by name Nala Kubera and Manigriva. These young men were young, good looking, and naturally rich. It goes without saying that as a result of these blessings, they were arrogant. Once, on the banks of the celestial Ganga, which was flowing at the foot of the Kailasa mountain, these two young men were sporting with their women. They had taken too much of the divine drink by the name Varuni, and they were deaf and blind to the world outside. They were sporting on the waters of the Ganga like a pair of wild elephants with their harem. Narada, the divine sage, was passing that way by chance. He saw them, but they, even after seeing him, were too drunk to pay any attention to him. They forgot that they should have honored the rishi, nor did they realize that they were behaving indecently in the presence of great man. The women rushed to the banks and quickly covered themselves up with the cloths which they had left there. They then saluted Narada, but the two brothers heeded him not. Narada wanted to cure them of the dread disease which goes by the name arrogance, and he also wanted to grace them with the good fortune of being saved by Krishna. Narada spoke. He said, "Man is visited by different types of mother, arrogance. A high-born prince is arrogant. A scholar will sometimes be arrogant. Rajoguna is often the cause of arrogance. But there is arrogance of a different type, different from all the others, and which is far worse. It is the arrogance born of Shri, wealth. Because with wealth, man gets involved with women, with gambling, with drinking, and when such a formidable arrogance visits him, man loses all perspective and becomes blind and deaf to ordinary rules of decorum even. Man loses his self-control and he becomes devoid of even kindness. He deludes himself into thinking that this body is permanent. To satisfy the thirsts of this body, he does not hesitate even to kill. The king who rules the entire earth and the beggar on the roadside are both equal when death comes. It equals them and both are reduced to the same handful of ashes. But the arrogant man does not realize this. He kills, not realizing what is in store for him. This body belongs to the one who feeds it, to the father and mother who made it, and in the end to worms like ants and animals like the dog which consume it. Only a fool will consider this body to live forever, since he does not know the difference between the body and the dweller in it, the Dehi, Deha and the Dehin. To one whose intellect is clouded because of arrogance, the only cure is poverty. Only a poor man will know that he is equal to the animals. A man who has suffered the pricks of thorns for lack of a better bed, whose face is weak for want of food, such a man will never wish another living being to come to harm. Even so, a man who has not gone through these tortures will not know the meaning of the word compassion. A man who is without ego, who is without the three madas, Vidya Mada, arrogance born of one being well read, Dhana Mada, arrogance because of wealth, and Kula Mada, arrogance because he is highborn. A man who does not suffer from these three madhas is absolutely impossible to find. Vidyamada, Dhanamada, Kulamada. Only a poor man can be free of these madas, and his suffering is the tapas he performs, leading him to worlds more lasting than this world of ours. To a poor man, there is an eternal lack of food. His frame is shrunken and he is always aching for food to satisfy his hunger. To such a man, the senses have no meaning. Unfed as they are, the senses shrink into nothingness. He has no thought of hurting his fellow man or any living being. Sadhus who treat all beings alike are naturally drawn towards the poor man whose senses have flown away from him. And in the company of good people, the poor man becomes released from this world of desires. A sadhu who has equanimity under all circumstances, who has no feelings other than devotion to Narayana, has no use for the contemptible one who is drunk with power and mother. As for you both, you are drunk with the nectar by name Varuni. You have lost your power of reasoning because you are drunk with the power of your wealth. You do not have your senses under control. You do not even conform to the rules of common etiquette that you should behave with decorum in the presence of sadhus like me. You are the sons of Kubera. Since you are full of tamas and irreverence, you will be born as a couple of trees on the earth. You will remember your previous birth and wait with impatience for your deliverance. When you will be born, there will also be born the Lord of Lords, Narayana, and he will deliver you from the earthly imprisonment, and he will also cure you of your arrogance, which has been your undoing. After cursing them, Narada went on his way, and the two sons of Kubera were twin trees growing in Gokula. Krishna decided that the time had come when the two brothers should have their deliverance, and so he went between the trees and made them fall on the ground. Hearing the loud noise, the inmates of all the houses and also Yashoda rushed out to see what had been happening. When she saw that her son had just escaped being crushed by the two huge trees, poor Yashoda was overcome with remorse for having tied up her son to the mortar. Quickly she untied the knots which bound him to the mortar, not knowing that he was the one who can untie the knots of karma and lead you to moksha. And when they were wondering about how the trees fell and how miraculously the child was saved from certain death, some children who were playing nearby said, "This Krishna crawled out of the house with the mortar trailing behind him. He was the one who went between the trees and the trees fell only after that. We also saw two men who looked like they were made up of light, and they spoke to Krishna. He spoke to them too, and then they rose up into the air and into the sky like birds of fire." No one, however, believed the words of the children. They said to themselves, "It is an impossible thing to have happened. How can a small child like Krishna fell two trees at the same time?" The falling of the trees and Krishna's coming out must have been so close to each other that it must have seemed to these children as though Krishna did it. As for the men of light, as they put it, here they had hid a smile as if to say, after all, children are gifted with imagination. They must have thought up this strange sight to make their story more convincing. So ended the Shapa Vimochana of the two Gandharva princes, Nalakubera and Manigriva. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu.